Okay, so the title again, Roads, Development and Cultural Change in Spiti, Past, Present and Future. Abhimanyu is a doctoral candidate in anthropology at the University of Heidelberg, Germany. His project investigates the processes and effects of road connectivity in Spiti. Prior to his PhD project, he worked as a social scientist at the Intergovernmental Institute in Kathmandu, doing applied qualitative research in some Himalayan border regions of India, Nepal, Tibet, and Bhutan. Abhimanyu holds an MA in Sociology from the Delhi School of Economics and an M.Phil in Development Studies from Cambridge University. And if you would call it the icing on the cake, is that he grew up in Himachal Pradesh. So he really understands the landscape and the culture here. And we are really excited to have you speak on a topic like roads, that how roads leads to cultural change and how it impacts the past, present, and future. So with that, Abhimanyu, please take over the mic and let's hear you speak. And at this point, I would urge everyone to please mute their mics and put their videos off. Once Abhimanyu is done, we will take your questions. You can raise your hands and I will call out your name. You can introduce yourselves and ask the questions that you need to ask. And I do want to say that Abhimanyu has a large fan following in Himachal. All his friends from school have been writing in for the link. And I'm so glad that they can hear you live today. So over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sonali ji, for this very nice opportunity for me to share a bit about my work. I think I shall share my screen as today I shall speak on the basis of a PowerPoint presentation, mostly photographs and maps. Just a moment, yeah. Share screen, desktop share. And can you see my screen now?
Yes, if you could put it on full screen mode.
Yeah, just a moment, yeah. Slideshow from start. Now is this visible?
Yes.
Okay. So, hi everyone, and Jule, as they say in Spiti, and thanks for coming to this talk. Today I'm going to talk about my doctoral research project. It's an ongoing research project. It's about roads, development, and cultural change in a trans Himalayan border region for which the field site is Spiti. So, I shall briefly give an introduction of the project. Um, my talk will be based on this ongoing doctoral project, which researches various kinds of effects of road connectivity on day to day life, livelihoods, and questions of identity in a Himalayan border region, taking the Spiti region as its field site. As Sonali ji just introduced my previous work, I have worked in a few other Himalayan border regions, and for my PhD, I wanted to come back to my home state, Himachal Pradesh, and therefore I chose to do my PhD in Spiti. My advisor is Professor Dr. William Sachs, a preeminent authority on Himalayan anthropology at the University of Heidelberg in Germany. And my project is funded by the grace of the German Academic Exchange Service, the DAAD. My fieldwork for this project, based upon which I will be talking about today. It happened mostly in Spiti and sometimes outside Spiti, also along the roads going to Spiti, in Shimla, in archives at Delhi, and in London. And it happened from early May 2018 till early February 2020. So I was quite lucky to finish my fieldwork just before the coronavirus crisis started. Yeah. Just a bit about anthropological research methods. For those of you who come from a non-academic background, my kind of research, it involves very long periods of immersion, of staying in the culture, the location, or the processes that one wants to study. So that's why I did several trips of a few months each to Spiti and spent time there. And anthropological research methods are developed in a way that they are mostly qualitative, and they reveal those aspects of life, of places, of events and processes involving or affecting human communities, which generally remain hidden from the view, or if visible, are poorly explained by brief encounters, by heavily biased or heavily ideologically biased viewpoints, and purely quantitative methods. So it's the whole rationale of anthropological research is that it's only through sustained engagement, through sustained immersion in the day-to-day life or among the phenomena that you wish to study, that aspects of it begin to reveal themselves, which otherwise would remain hidden. Now I come to the location of Spiti. Spiti is located in North India, in Himachal Pradesh, in the northeastern corner of Himachal Pradesh. It is so here I would like to make a distinction between Spiti as a region and Spiti Valley. Yeah. So Spiti is a division, an administrative division of the Lahaul Spiti district, which is the largest district of Himachal Pradesh. And as you see in this map, it is outlined in pink. The green whole thing is the Lahaul district, Lahaul Spiti district, but the pink outlined area is the Spiti division. And Spiti borders China to the east, Ladakh to the north, Kinnaur to the south, Kullu to the southwest, and Lahaul Valley to the west. And the road that I will be talking about today will be the road outlined in purple in this map, which is the National Highway 505. More on this later. So, just to quickly introduce you to what Spiti is like, Spiti is actually geographically quite a large region. It is spread over more than 7,000 square kilometers. And as I just said, it has an international border with China on the east, about 90 kilometers long. It shares a border with Ladakh to the north, to the Lahaul Valley in the west, and with Kullu and Kinnaur in the south. The population is about 12,000 per persons in the entire Spiti division, which is barely over 1.2 or 1.5 persons per square kilometer. So it's a very sparsely populated landscape. But the habitations all tend to be very densely clustered in villages, of which there are 70 in Spiti. The administrative headquarters of Spiti is Kaza, which is a village in Upper Spiti at 3,700 meters of altitude. And Spiti has something known as an annual working season because the geoclimatic conditions in Spiti are such that winters are extremely harsh and connectivity by road gets limited in the winter. So the active working season during which all the construction takes place, all the agricultural activity takes place, and most of the tourism business takes place in Spiti, it is from mid-April till mid-October every year. And the winters are supposed to be a period of rest and rejuvenation and a lot of cultural bonding, a lot of festivities and um, communal prayer gatherings and so on in the valley. So even though Spiti is surrounded by very high mountains on all four sides, to the north with Ladakh, to the east with China, to the south with Kinnaur and Kullu, and to the west with Lahaul, nonetheless, Spiti was never isolated culturally, politically, or economically. Even though Spiti was away from any major trade route, like Lahaul Valley, which is just next to the Spiti Valley, west to the Spiti Valley, Lahaul Valley had a corridor of the ancient Silk Road passing through it, but that corridor, that route completely bypassed Spiti. Spiti itself shared only very minor kind of trading passes with Western Tibet and with Ladakh. So trade was kind of a small scale supplementary economic activity in Spiti, but never a major part of the local political economy, except for some portions of Spiti, which traded horses in the Pin Valley, for example. And Spiti, as many people would know, it is a part of the Tibetan cultural sphere. And very long ago, as the research by Dr. Christian Zahuda of the Austrian Academy of Sciences shows that Spiti was several centuries ago a part of Western Tibet. And then in the 16th century, it became a part of the kingdom of Ladakh, finally, like after several wars between Tibet and Ladakh. And then when the Dogra invasion happened in the 1840s, Spiti became a part of the Sikh Empire. And finally, when the Sikhs lost to the British, then Spiti became a part of British India, and thereby coming for the first time into a pan-Indian imagination of a nation in 1840s. But nonetheless, because Spiti has always been very far removed geographically from most political centers of power, therefore, access to Spiti was very slow, and in the British period, people would take a long period of time, up to 2 to 3 weeks, just to make a one-way journey to Spiti. And Spiti remained more or less unchanged, and it continued to have some significant kinds of religious and political ties to Western Tibet and even to Lhasa before 1947. But once India became independent in 1947, then Spiti very firmly and resolutely became a part of the Indian nation. And its ties began to be intensified with the governance, the economy, the political system, and the cultural influences of India in the decades following the Indian independence from British rule in 1947. But at the same time, while this was happening, it also meant that the ties with Tibet began to gradually reduce because of the Chinese annexation of Tibet in the 1950s. But trade and some family connections between peoples of Spiti and Western Tibet continued nonetheless all the way down till 2010. And then, due to a particular incident, the border was completely sealed. So right now there is no active international trading post within Spiti. The only place nearby where there is an international trading post is the Shipkila Pass in Kinnor, a few kilometers south of the Spiti division. Here is a satellite map of the Spiti region, the Spiti division, as you can see. So Spiti, as you see, is a very dry region. And to the left side of the map, you can see that there are some snow-covered mountains. These very high mountains of the Great Himalaya range, they prevent much of the rain-laden clouds from coming into Spiti. And therefore, Spiti does not get much rain from the monsoons. And also the altitude also prevents it in Spiti. And besides, in the winter also, Spiti gets quite a lot of snowfall, but it is very little compared to how much Lahore gets, because Lahore is in Lahore, the progress of the monsoon is not thwarted by the high mountains as much it is in Spiti. So Spiti geographically can be said to be lying in the Trans Himalayas. Yeah, it's very cold, very dry, very little precipitation, uh, and the fauna and flora is also very similar to what you find from this place onwards throughout Western Tibet or even in parts of Central Asia. So that's a typical view of Spiti. The river that you can see flowing in the middle of this image is the Spiti River. And as you can see, there are these small patches of green. These are the agricultural fields which lie in the fertile riverbed of the Spiti Valley. And there are some villages in the Spiti Valley which are also lying on the high ridges that you can see on the right side of the map. Yeah. So the valley floor in elevation is about, say, between 3,400 and 4,100 meters above the sea level. The highest village is at 4,100 meters above sea level in the valley floor. But on the ridge that you see to the right hand side, the highest village there is at 4,510 meters, Comic Village, which is also one of the highest permanently inhabited villages in Asia. That's a typical Spiti village with densely clustered houses and surrounded by fields, agricultural fields. What you see in this image is are fields of ripened barley. It was taken in late September 2013. So barley here is ready to be harvested, and the pea crop of Spiti has already been harvested. So these two are the major crops in Spiti: barley, which is traditional and historic, and pea, the green pea, hara matar, which has been introduced by the government of India in the 1990s in Spiti. And in some of the lower parts of Spiti, there is also some very, very juicy and delicious apple, but that's limited to a few villages in lower Spiti, and it was also introduced by the government in the 90s. A typical Spiti house utilizes the materials which are found in the vicinity of any village in Spiti, which include stone and mud and certain kinds of shrubs and certain kinds of trees that grow in Spiti and are found in some abundance in the valley. And typically, in a Spiti household, the cattle or the animals, they live in the lower floor and the family lives in the upper floor. And in front of the household, there is a pen, a corral, where animals are kept and stall fed outdoors in the winter. And in the at night, they are returned to the room at the lower floor. Yeah. So, Spiti's society is entirely Tibetan Buddhist. All I think almost 99% of the population is Tibetan Buddhist in Spiti, and three orders of Tibetan Buddhism are represented in Spiti. One is the oldest order of Tibetan Buddhism, the Nyingmas, who live in the Pin Valley. Then there are the Gelugpas, who have the famous Key Monastery, which you see in this photograph, and the Tabo Monastery under them. Then there is the Sakya, which owns the Kaza Monastery and the Comic Monastery. Yeah. Spiti is a very deeply religious, very deeply faithful society. The Pitiyas, as the people of Spiti are called, I mean, in Bhoti script, they write it as Pitipa, but it's pronounced as Pitya. So the Pitya people, they are very deeply faithful people. And I want to share a small story here about an incident that I myself witnessed in July 2018 in the Key Monastery. So there an annual celebration called Guitur was happening, and the presiding Lama of the monastery, the 19th Lochen Tulku Rinpoche, who is the reincarnate Lama, he was presiding over the ceremony, and this charm dance was happening. So this festivity is considered to wash away the sins of the previous year and prepare the village for auspicious beginning once the harvesting is completed in that season for that season. Yeah. So this was therefore happening in July in 2018. Yeah. So after this happened, just after this particular ceremony was culminated, a huge rainbow came right over the monastery, just next to the monastery over a sacred mountain. And I was like very, very surprised. I mean, it was a surprisingly beautiful sight. And I expressed my awe to some locals, but they said that in a matter of fact way that it's all because of the Lochen Tulku Rinpoche. He has the power of bringing rain when he wishes. And they told me a story how he had been invited to another Himalayan border region in Ladakh a few years ago when that place had been going through some periods of drought, and his presence there begot it rain for the people of that area, and therefore the people of that area also became big followers of the Lochen Tulku Rinpoche. So, whether one believes or not in supranatural occurrences or beliefs, this is how the people of Spiti impute uh, occurrences which can appear fantastical or which can appear amazing to spiritual forces. And similarly, some kinds of bad fortune or accidents or natural disasters are also imputed to karma or to spiritual forces which have been harmed or maligned. So now I'll talk a bit about the society in Spiti. The people of Spiti are a patrilineal society which practice primogeniture, which basically means that families trace their ancestors through the male lineage of the family. And primogeniture basically means that the property is handed from father to son only, and it passes only between male members of the family. So patrilineal would directly imply that it's not just limited to one of the, it cannot pass to the siblings of the son, but it only always passes to the eldest son. Yeah. So Spiti has two kinds of households, the Khangchen and the Khenchung. Khangchen is the household of the eldest son. When the eldest son marries, he inherits the Khangchen from his father. And the father then moves to a nearby or adjacent house called the Khenchung, which is the house where the younger male siblings of the eldest son live, unless they are in the monastery. Because the land is customarily passed from father to eldest son, who is the Khangchen son. The Khenchungs, the younger siblings, customarily inherit no land and are usually sent to become monks. And monks help the family nonetheless in the agricultural season, uh, and for that period they kind of get a little break from the monastery. And similarly, the eldest daughter customarily inherits the jewelry and finery of the mother. The younger daughters customarily become nuns, but nuns, due to the absence of nunneries in Spiti historically, they typically stayed in their parents' or relatives' households. This has changed of late. I'll talk about that later. And at the bottom of the Spiti social structure come these two categories of people known as the Zos and the Betas. The Zo people are the metal workers, and the Beta people are musicians, and they customarily inherit only the crafts of their forefathers, and they are obliged to keep working in these crafts, and they cannot possess any land according to the customs of Spiti. All of this has underwent significant change in the recent decades, and I'll talk about that later. But this is just to give you an idea of how things were by and large when the roads were not there in Spiti. So as I just said, Spiti practices Tibetan Buddhism, and it is a part of the Tibetan cultural sphere. So, like much of the Tibetan world, Spiti is agro-pastoral society. So they practice pastoralism, animal husbandry, and at the same time they practice some bit of agriculture. The kind of pastoralism practiced in Spiti is not migratory. So people of Spiti, they do not migrate between habitations in summer or winter. They stay put in the same village throughout the year, and typically the what you would call them, the rangelands of the Spiti villagers are never far away from the village, just at the most 1 or 2 days of distance. And in the winters, the animals are all brought back to the household and they are stall fed. Apart from the barley crop, there is the green pea crop in Spiti, and it is the major cash crop, the only cash crop in Spiti, in much of Spiti, because in lower Spiti there is also the apple belt, but my research focuses more on upper Spiti, so I'll talk primarily about that. Yeah. So Kaza is the administrative and business hub of present-day Spiti, and this was my primary field site. And Kibber, which is about 18 kilometers away from Kaza and lies on one of the higher ridges, which I showed you in the photograph before. Kibber was my second field site where I did some of my field work as well. So, just a moment. So, coming back to this old map that I showed, roads are the biggest forces behind the acceleration of changes in all realms of life in Spiti, be it governance or livelihoods or culture or the ways in which identity and citizenship are experienced. And the road network in Spiti was a response to the Indian government's anxiety to integrate Spiti. And I quote this from one of the district gazetteers from the 1970s, to integrate Spiti, to bring it into the mainstream of the nation's life, in the face particularly of the threat posed by China right beyond Spiti's eastern borders. So I've come across certain archival evidence which shows that the anxiety of the government to build roads to Himalayan border regions starting in the 1950s and 60s was very directly related to the threat posed by the annexation of Tibet by China in the 1950s. And the road network in Spiti came basically due to that, and everything in Spiti which exhibits modernity or governmentality followed the coming of roads. So the Manali Kaza road, which came in from the west of Spiti, as you can see in this map, that was completed in by 1960. So the road from Manali to Kaza was completed by 1960, whereas the road from Shimla to Kaza was completed by the late 1970s. The roads are built by the Indian government, and this entire road, now the road from Shimla all the way to Manali through Spiti, it is maintained by the Indian government, but only the section from Sumdo at Spiti's eastern edge till Gramphu, which is a village at the base of the Rotang Pass, that is known as the National Highway 505, and this is maintained by the Border Roads Organization, which is a body under the Ministry of Defense in India. And but besides, not all villages in Spiti lie along the valley floor, because this National Highway 505, it passes along the valley floor of the Spiti Valley by and large. So some villages lie in one or other of the branch valleys of Spiti, like the Pin Valley or the Lingti Valley, or above in the villages over the ridge of Spiti. So to them, there are link roads which are maintained by the Himachal Pradesh Public Works Department. And the Manali Kaza road completely closes for several months in the winter, whereas the Shimla Kaza road remains open throughout the year. So just to show you what the roads look like, in case you haven't been to Spiti, the road from Shimla to Kaza is a very long journey. It typically takes 2 days. It's 420 kilometers long, and it often passes across very precipitous slopes and cliffs, and it is very susceptible to landslides and rock slides and avalanches. But nonetheless, this road remains open all through the year. So that's a famous, or I would rather say infamous part of the Shimla Kaza route known as the Maling Dhang. Uh, and this is the Manali Kaza route. The Manali Kaza route typically takes about 10 to 12 hours to complete. This is before the tunnel was completed. My entire research happened before the tunnel was completed. So it typically takes 10 to 12 hours. And now with the completion of the tunnel, I've heard that it takes about 8 hours, because now you don't have to cross the Rutang Pass. But nonetheless, this road closes down for 6 to 7 months a year, because of the snow on the Kunzum Pass. Because from this route, the Manali Kaza route, you have to cross two mountain passes. In the Shimla to Kaza route, you have to cross absolutely no mountain pass, so it can be remaining open all through the year. In the Manali Kaza route, the Kunzum Pass will remain closed during the winter, and because of which the impact of the Rohtang tunnel may not be so much pronounced for Spiti as it is for Lahore. I'll talk more about that towards the end. So that's another view of the Manali Kaza route just before you enter the Spiti Valley above Losar. Well, as you saw in the previous pictures, the geology of Spiti is consists of very loose and fragile rocks which keep slipping and falling all the time. So road repairs, clearing and maintenance is a round the year project, and the government puts in a lot of money to keep this happening. For the construction of roads, the government began to bring in a lot of labor from outside Spiti and even outside Himachal Pradesh. Initially, it was mostly Nepali workers that came to Spiti in the 1970s, 80s, I would say even through the 90s. But in the last 2 decades or so, it's increasingly people from some of the impoverished parts of Indian states like Chhattisgarh and Odisha and Bihar, Jharkhand, and Uttar Pradesh that come to Spiti for roadworks. And they are a very visible presence in Spiti, particularly during the working season. Then some migrant workers also come to Spiti, and this is a trend that has particularly increased in the last 2 decades or so. Since Spiti people have also started going a lot more to travel outside Spiti, and particularly on pilgrimages to parts of eastern Indian parts like Nalanda, Bodh Gaya, etc. in Bihar, which are very impoverished regions, and there they make contacts with local people in those regions, and often people from there they come to Spiti thereby to serve as domestic staff, and these kind of workers they stay in Spiti all through the year, whereas the road workers they only stay in Spiti seasonally. Yeah, so you would find sometimes migrant workers in Spiti who are not local but have been living in Spiti for several years. Another kind of people that began to come into Spiti with the coming of roads was non-local traders. This is a trend that started in the 1970s, and initially it was a trickle, but gradually these traders who come from lower parts of Himachal Pradesh like Hamirpur and Una, they, because of their exposure and larger trade contacts in the world outside Spiti, they slowly began to have a rather influential presence in Spiti. And today they dominate much of the commodities market in Spiti. I mean, they bring in supplies of all kinds, whether it is fresh vegetables or construction materials or electronics or clothing material or so on and so forth. And not that many Spiti people engage in retailing or shopkeeping as many or at as influential a level as non-local traders in Spiti from places like Hamirpur and Una. With the coming of the roads in Spiti, also what began to come was a group of people that actually has been coming to Spiti since the 19th century, which is people who are interested in things such as Tibetan culture, Buddhism, Himalayan geology, Himalayan botany, cartography, and so on. But in the 1970s and 80s, a small trickle of people began to come as tourists, and Spiti particularly came into the limelight of the tourism scene in the world with the first Kal Chakra ceremony that was performed by the Dalai Lama in Spiti in 1983. And then some of these people initially that used to come to Spiti as tourists were also Tibetan Buddhists or practitioners of Tibetan culture and so on. And Spiti was formally opened to tourism in 1991, and which basically means that the inner line permit for Indians who did not belong to Spiti was completely done away with, and for foreigners the restrictions were much lowered. So foreign tourists made the bulk of tourists coming to Spiti all the way till 2015 or so. What happened in the last 4 5 years is a sudden and rather exponential boom in mass tourism in Spiti, where tens of thousands of tourists, primarily Indians, have been coming to Spiti. And the reason for this is also partly to do with the growing visibility of Spiti as a relatively unspoiled trans Himalayan destination, unlike Ladakh, which is much more commercialized, and also Spiti as a place which is accessible by road throughout the year through the Shimla route. Yeah. And so Spiti has also become quite visible on social media like Instagram, like YouTube, and on vlogs, etc., which have made Spiti a place on the bucket list of a lot of upwardly mobile Indians. And in the last 4 5 years, also in Spiti, there has been a lot of wildlife tourism happening in Spiti because of the relative ease with which snow leopards can be sighted in the valley. The village Kibber is particularly famous for its ease of sighting the snow leopard. And in the last 5 6 years, it's become a very lucrative business for villagers of particularly Kibber to engage in the snow leopard sighting business. Then 4x4 vehicle groups also come to Spiti in the winter. And this is also a trend that by and large started about 5 or 6 years ago. Although the Raid D Himalaya races have been happening in Spiti for much longer before that, since 2008 or 9, I think. But 4x4 vehicle groups as organized groups coming to Spiti in the winter is a much more recent phenomenon. And several such groups now visit Spiti every winter. And another phenomenon, another kind of tourism that you find happening in Spiti these days is a very niche form of tourism, which is by and large unknown to any other part of India. It is ice climbing. So, climbing the frozen waterfalls, of which there are many in Spiti, in the winter. It's been spearheaded by a group of young Indian climbers, and Spiti is quite an upcoming destination for it, and it has recently also been mentioned in the world's biggest publication on climbing called The Alpinist as the place to look forward to for ice climbing in the world in the years to come. So, what roads have done overall is that they have led to the increase of state presence in Spiti. And the increase of state presence in Spiti itself is the biggest factor which has brought about changes in everything else, whether it be the community life of the people, the household organization of labor, whether it is everyday culture, and so on and so forth. So I'll just quickly go through a list of some of the projects that the state has brought into Spiti with the coming in of roads. One is the establishment of a basic modern healthcare system. So there is a hospital in Kaza and some primary healthcare centers in some villages in Spiti. Then there has been a significant expansion of government schools in number and strength. There were schools in Spiti even before roads came, but their numbers and strength really increased after roads. Then, very importantly, there is a government subsidy system of supplying food rations, wood, fuel oil, and seeds to all households in Spiti. And particularly for the winters, people very heavily rely on this system. Then there is state support for sports, youth clubs, and cultural events, including the prayer ceremony that I showed you before. The state really provides a lot of financial support often to these events. Then there are some subsidies for running homestays in the valley to promote tourism. Then there is the setting up of other kinds of infrastructures of connectivity, which is enabled by roads, such as an electricity grid, a telecom network, and most recently, a 4G mobile network. So it's only around Christmas last year that Spiti for the first time got a 4G mobile network from a place where it had almost no mobile connectivity whatsoever. So it's a rather sudden and major jump that Spiti has taken. And some of the other projects that have followed from the state include the establishment of an administrative block in Kaza in the 1980s, which was very important for enabling the stay of officials in this very remote part of Himachal Pradesh. And then there has been the distribution of land to landless persons in Spiti as Notod Zameen, and building of irrigation canals has happened to irrigate these new and agricultural lands. So it's not so much redistribution of lands as the creation of new agricultural lands by employing new irrigation canals, because the customarily held agricultural lands, they are primarily watered through glacial water sources. Then government is the largest source of employment in present day Spiti, either as laborers or as officials or as in the clerical staff. Like a lot of Spiti people find part-time or full-time employment. Then another major part of what the government has done in the larger context of Spiti is that the entire population of Spiti is designated as a scheduled tribe. So they are eligible for affirmative action laws that create positive discrimination and quotas in government run universities and government jobs for Spiti people. And besides, in the recent years, because of the unstable relationship with China, there has been a growing presence of the military and the paramilitary forces along Spiti's border with China in the east. But as compared to Ladakh, Spiti is much, much less militarized. I mean, you hardly ever feel that there is any army except in the at the point where you just enter Spiti at Sumdo. So, with the coming of roads, there has also been an increase in private and non-governmental activities, which include the growth of markets, yeah, particularly in Kaza, and the registration of 190 NGOs, which has happened in Spiti since the early 1990s. And a lot of these NGOs have come in response to an awareness that too much is changing very fast in Spiti. So people need to preserve aspects of their culture, of their identity, which they feel are essential to be preserved. Then the establishment of several tourism businesses has happened in the last 3 decades or so in Spiti. Then a few private schools have also been founded, and people often want to send their children to these private schools because they have more of an emphasis on teaching in English, which is a more widespread phenomenon all across India. Then there has also been the establishment of several new nunneries and a few new Buddhist temples in the valley since the mid 1990s, since the coming of the roads. And now I'll talk of the changes that have happened in Spiti with the coming of the roads in terms of flows, in terms of mobilities. Yeah. So with the coming of roads to Spiti, what has increased to quite a great extent is the flow of government projects, of money, of new kinds of things in the valley, of electricity and new kinds of information technologies, communication technologies in the valley. And the flows of non-local people have also increased, like government workers, defense personnel, researchers, NGO workers, tourists, people involved in pilgrimage, and Buddhist lamas from outside. Then critically, the flow of local people themselves within the valley has also increased quite a lot with the coming in of the road network. So people from one village can travel to the other for work, for education, to meet friends and relatives, for attending community events, for transporting agricultural produce, which is very important, for running taxis, for accessing healthcare, for accessing banking, for settling in other villages, etc. So, a lot of people in Spiti in the recent years have been buying lands and houses in and around Kaza because Kaza is a growing hub of all kinds of commercial activity in the valley. And while right now I talked only of the flows within Spiti, roads have also increased the flows of people, of the local people who want to travel to distant towns for education and sometimes for employment. It has also increased the flow of locals who want to travel to distant Buddhist pilgrimage sites in North, Central, East, and South India, places like Bodh Gaya, Nalanda, Kushinagar, Kathmandu, Mundgod in Karnataka, and so on. Yeah. And but out migration on the whole remains very low in the valley. And one one thing that I skipped is that local people also are traveling to other parts of Himachal Pradesh for healthcare access because it's not that great within the valley. The resources are very limited, although the doctors there make very valiant efforts to serve the people of Spiti as well as they can. So finally, I'll talk about Spiti as a zone of contact between various kind of flows, between various kinds of peoples and forces, as a zone of conflict and a zone where conflicts are negotiated on a day-to-day and longer term level. So with the increased flows of people and things, Spiti has been experiencing change on several fronts. In no particular order, some of the fields are religion, language, time use, leisure, distribution of labor within the household, as well as the village level, human and environment relationships, citizenship, identity, and livelihoods. And now this is the last section of the talk, and in this I will talk about some particular topics which exhibit this contact, conflict, and negotiation based around the themes that I just mentioned. So, one major thing that has happened in Spiti is a growing reliance on migrant labor, whether it be for road construction, which is basically a governmental activity, but also for help in the agricultural season and help in day to day chores in the household. And as I said, that a lot of migrant laborers are seasonal and they go back towards the winter to their homes or to other places, but quite a few stay back in Spiti as domestic workers, and a lot of them tend to be rather very young. Yeah, and so one thing that has happened is that their presence brings about an element in Spiti society which did not quite exist in the past, the presence of non-Buddhist, non-local outsiders. And it has naturally led to some tensions regarding uh, what kind of impact could it have on the culture of the household, on the culture of the valley by large also. And but because now most people in every single Spiti household are employed in various kinds of activities, in agriculture, in tourism, in government jobs, so often you would find that that both the parents are working and the children are going to school, so there is no one to carry on the agricultural tasks and the pastoral activities of the household like it was done in the earlier days. So these tasks are taken over by domestic migrant workers. So besides, healthcare access is also very tenuous in Spiti Valley. uh, the healthcare access in Spiti is only sufficient for dealing with minor kind of problems like certain kinds of fractures and certain basic kinds of illnesses, but anything from childbirth to any major kind of surgery, people usually are referred to hospitals in lower hill towns like Rampur or Shimla or Kullu. And the situation particularly becomes very dire for pregnant women or women about to give birth, because the road journey is so bumpy and long to all these places. And in the winters, the condition regarding healthcare becomes all the more precarious because the roads are often closed due to snow and avalanches, and helicopters are sometimes called in by the Kaza administration in order to airlift patients out. But sometimes even the helicopters arrive too late and patients die in Spiti every winter. But at the same time, while modern medicine exists in Spiti, customary medicine also continues to exist in some form. And this is not just the very well accepted and recognized system of Tibetan medicine, which is Sowa Rigpa, but also of healing through oracles and through shamans in the valley. And as you can see, this is the photograph of a woman who's been treated for an ailment which doctors couldn't quite diagnose correctly for several years. So the villagers sought the help of the local devta in healing the woman. So then in Spiti, there are also a lot of tensions arising from the new kind of agricultural setup in the valley. In the past, Spiti's reliance was primarily on barley, which is grown within the valley, for which the manure is found within the valley, and on the from human night soil as well as from animal manure. But nowadays, the inputs required from agriculture also come from outside for the green pea crop. Yeah, and the market for the green pea crop is also by and large outside Spiti. So, and the road connectivity to Spiti is very precarious because of the very unstable landscape through which the roads passes. So very often, even in the harvest season, the roads get blocked. And if the roads get blocked, the entire harvest of the village can go waste, and a lot of money and inputs and hard work can be lost in that process. So, but I want to also share a small story which kind of shows how this particular thing of the reliance on roads for integration with the larger agricultural market is also has also once been used for claiming citizenship in a very interesting way. So some years ago, there was a case in Spiti Valley where a bridge was washed away by a flash flood during the harvest season. And the pradhan of those villages in the Spiti Valley, he said that please help us to the Kaza administration, please get this road back in shape as soon as possible. But the administration was said to be a little slow in acting, and this pradhan, as a kind of a sign of desperation or frustration, he just rhetorically said that, well, the Kaza administration should help us, otherwise we shall take the help of China. And that brought the attention of all sorts of security agencies and intelligence agencies, and this guy was arrested and later on released from prison, and later on kind of hailed as a local hero because he basically showed how desperate the situation in the valley can become if the roads are uh, not in an operational mode. And at the same time, it shows also quite a clever use of the proximity to China to get a government service delivered to them in time. With the coming of roads, Spiti has also seen a Buddhist revival of sorts. So traditionally in Spiti, there have been these monasteries, as I said earlier. Besides, there have also been a lot of elements of the pre-Buddhist faith in Spiti, which is Lhachos, the worship of nature spirits, etc. But with the coming of the roads, many lamas of major monasteries have been visiting Spiti, including the Dalai Lama of the Gelugpa order, the head of the Sakya order, the Sakya Trizin, then some famous international Buddhist teachers such as Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, and all they all visit Spiti to deliver lectures, to conduct retreats, etc. And this has at the same time also increased tourism and pilgrim footfall within the valley, and has also brought in a lot of new money to construct new temples, new retreat centers, new nunneries, etc. in the valley. And sometimes it has also created some frictions between the kind of pure Tibetan Buddhism that these major religious figures espouse and the kind of local older forms of nature worship that exist in Spiti. And then there are some hopes and anxieties that have naturally been triggered by the massive influx of people that Spiti has been seeing over the last 4 or 5 years through domestic tourism, through a massive rise in domestic tourism. To give you an idea of how big it has been, till 2015, there were on an average around 3 to 4 thousand tourists coming to Spiti, and that number was primarily made up of foreigners, Westerners, Far East Asians, and a very large number of Israelis. But ever since, there have been tens of thousands of Indian tourists coming to Spiti. Um, and that has led, on one hand, to the construction of lots of tourism businesses, establishment of lots of tourism businesses, new income opportunities. But at the same time, it has also brought about some new kinds of frictions between these new segments of people coming to Spiti and the traditional way of life in Spiti. An example which I think is good to give in this context is also something that I recently read has been happening in Ladakh, that Spiti shares this system of dry toilets in which the toilet is located on the upper floor of the house, and through a hole, a person defecates in a room which is sealed for much of the year. And once the defecation is over, then you cover it up with the yak dung, like you throw yak dung over it, so it kind of neutralizes any bacterial infection. So this is a system by which people also use night soil to create manure, and annually this sealed room is opened once a year in order to fertilize the fields of Spiti where they grow barley or where they grow apple or the green pea, etc. But of late, the tourists that have been coming there, particularly from India, quite a few of them have been, they find it very problematic to engage with this kind of a toilet, the dry toilet system. And sometimes they're also very, because of the lack of a flush toilet, they have problems and all. So what you see on the side is that in the winter in Spiti, one particular homestay deployed an innovative form of piping system in order to create a sewage operational in the winter. But these kinds of experiments and all are only possible for households with a lot of resources, and most of the PTR people, they cannot afford these kinds of engagements because water is very, very scarce in the valley. But that is not something that a lot of tourists understand very well. And sometimes tourists also demand often that they want to take a bath daily, morning and evening, because PT has so much dust. I mean, so I think it's also a bit about people not really knowing what they are headed for. They read it on the internet, they read it on Instagram that this is a great place and one should go there. But their knowledge that does not include much more than that. Yeah? That it's a high altitude area, it's a fragile ecosystem, it is a water scarce area, it is a cold desert, it has a particular kind of history and culture. So there needs to be more awareness around that. But right now, there do exist some kinds of tensions around tourism. And another kind of tension that exists in the tourism sector in Spiti is that a lot of the tourism businesses like homestays and hotels are run by well connected and well versed outsiders who run these places on lease or in co partnership with locals. Some local people feel that these outsiders are benefiting disproportionately from the business and the tourism boom in Spiti. But at the same time, they cannot help but feel that these outsiders are necessary because these outsiders have the connections and the networks to bring in more tourists to Spiti. And the local people feel that these outsiders know better about the tastes of the kinds of tourists that are now coming in, particularly the domestic tourists. So there is some anxiety regarding tourism also in present day Spiti. So recently in 2018 October, there was a meeting held in Upper Spiti where the people of Upper Spiti decided not to sell any lands to people from any other tribal area of Himachal Pradesh. And more recently, a meeting was held in 2019 where some influential local tourist tourism stakeholders decided to gradually phase out this practice of hiring outsiders for co-partnership in tourism businesses by 2021, 2022 or so. So finally, I will talk a bit about what is a Scythian identity, and there with all these flows happening in Spiti, with all these encounters of a new kind, with all these businesses of a new kind finding roots in Spiti, new people coming, new things coming. Quite a few people and NGOs have been trying to grapple with this issue of what constitutes a Spiti identity. Yeah, like are Spitians Tibetans? Are they Indians? Are they Indians and Tibetans? Are they Indians and Tibetans of a particular kind? So this kind of conversation has been voiced in many different ways. What you see on the right side is a photograph of a prominent Beta musician from Spiti. As I said earlier, the society in Spiti is a deeply hierarchical society, and in some ways it mirrors the Hindu caste society. And the Zo people and the Beta people customarily inherited no land and only could practice their customary uh, forms of livelihood. So, this musician, for example, has been asked by many people to continue to practice his traditional form of life because a lot of the folk music that he knows, whether religious or for events such as childbirth or marriage, are now only remaining in his memory. So a lot of people pay him good money to do this work and all also, and they want that he continues this tradition in his family. But this man himself wants his child to get educated and to be able to do what they want. Yeah, like if they want to move out of PT, he's open even for that. So therefore, this remains a question, as in how to think about the Scythian identity and also how to preserve some forms of Spiti culture and language and traditions in the face of changes which seem to be inevitable with the coming in of roads and connectivity. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the future in Spiti, and I'll talk that in the context of two roads, the Rutang Tunnel and the Pin Bhava Tunnel, and the Pin Bhava Pass Road, very briefly. As I said earlier itself, the Rutang Tunnel, it opens up near Sisu in the Lahore Valley, as highlighted in this map. So the Rotang tunnel might be bypassed by this. The Rotang Pass may be bypassed by the Rotang tunnel, but the Kunzum Pass is not. So for Spiti, the Rotang tunnel does not change things that dramatically, particularly in the context of winter. But in the context of summer, yes, it makes access easier for people to Manali, and they can reach Manali much faster, whether it is for work or for education, and particularly for healthcare. And also, the completion of this tunnel now makes it easier for the Border Roads Organization to start improving the section of the road between Gramfu and Losar, which is said to be in a horrible condition ever since it was constructed in the 1950s, 60s. Yeah? So now the Border Roads Organization can both begin to improve this road in a faster manner, for which they also have a budget now. And also, they can open the uh, Kunzum Pass earlier and close it later in the year with the coming of the Rutang Tunnel. Then there is another road which will come to Spiti Valley from the Pin Valley, which is a tributary valley of the Spiti River. And this road will connect a place near Kaza called Atargu, from where the roads start to the Pin Valley. There it will pass through the Pin Valley, cross over the 4,870-meter high Pim Bhaba Pass, and enter the Kinnaur district. So this will make access for people from the Pin Valley to the world outside very easy, as compared to the past where they have to depend on their very perilous road to the Spiti Valley and then to Kinnaur. Now they can directly cross over the Pin Bhava Pass to enter Kinnaur. And this makes it easier for them to make their agricultural produce reach the markets of Thiog, of Rampur, of Shimla, and also to access healthcare and education, etc. In these places outside Spiti. But this road is still under some process of finalization of approvals from the Ministry of Environment, I think. But by and large, I think this will come up in the next 5-6 years. This road will also be constructed, but it will face the same problem as the road from the Rutang side. That there you have the Kunzum Pass, which cannot be crossed in the winter. Here you will have the Pin Bhava Pass, which cannot be crossed in the winter. So, with that, I sum up today's talk, and I have just two suggestions that if you want, you can read a book that I co authored with the American photographer of Himalayas, Kevin Bobrisky. It's called Kailash Yatra, a long walk to Mount Kailash through Humla. And it's an account of an expedition that we both were part of in the monsoon of 2016, where we walked about 300 kilometers from Western Nepal into Western Tibet and back, looking at the cultural, economic, and livelihood exchanges across the border in that region. So I'm yet to write my thesis, so you would be able to read more on what I'm doing on Spiti later on. And as a video that I would really like you all to watch is this video by this talented young photographer called Himanshu Khakta. It's a 4-minute video called A Nerve Wracking Himalayan Ride on an HRTC bus. So it will give you a good idea of how brave the bus drivers and truck drivers, for that matter, of Himachal Pradesh are to be driving, delivering people and supplies, transporting them on these roads into and out of Spiti. So, with that, I conclude and thank you very much for your time and patience. Over to you, Sonali.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks so much for the wonderful talk. We got to learn so much about how roads impact the life of people in Spiti. And I'm glad that you actually talked about your book, Kailash Yatra. I had made my notes and I forgot to mention this book. And I really urge all of you to see Kailash Yatra, a long walk to Mount Kailash through Humla, that Abhimanyu was just talking about. And I have so many questions, but I will come on to them. First, let us take the first question. Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya, she has her first question. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, Sonali. Actually, this is a fascinating talk, and no wonder. Actually, roads have created, I mean, throughout the colonial period and also post colonial period, changes and havoc on all the hill regions that we all have seen.
Mhm.
And now, I mean, it is a fascinating talk. So I would ask Abhimanyu that do you, as a researcher, do you see or foresee Spiti's fate as one of Darjeeling or Sikkim? This is my first question.
Mhm.
And second question is, Spiti people, they had their own culture. They had their own intangible heritage, own song, own dance. So, and like there were strong Buddhist also tradition. So,
Mhm.
with the arrival of the outsiders and the migrants, you mentioned that they were in friction. So, do you see that the traditional heritage, the traditional intangible components of the people they are losing it in the process of the construction of roads and the arrival of the outsiders in the region and the
Okay.
tourists?
Okay. Uh, Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for both the questions. As for the first question, will Spiti become like another Darjeeling or Gangtok? It would be hard for me to say that, ma'am. I haven't been in those regions and don't know very well about those regions. But I also know that there are certain identity movements happening in that region. Those regions have very different kind of dynamic to them, political, ethnic, cultural dynamic. So I think a better place for comparing Spiti is Ladakh. Will Spiti become another Ladakh or not? Well, I think Spiti
I said
already
Shimla, not
Shimla,
Gangtok, but Shimla,
Shimla.
which was a
I
colonial
uh,
summer capital. Mm.
Sure, ma'am. I don't really think so, ma'am. I mean, one is a matter of scale. Spiti is, I mean, places in Spiti are very small compared to Shimla. And secondly, reaching Spiti, transporting materials to Spiti, access to Spiti is still very, very difficult. So I don't see that happening to that extent as it has happened in bigger towns like Darjeeling or Shimla. Though, of course, changes do happen when roads come in. And that's why I say a better place to compare with Spiti is a place in a comparable geographic area, which would be Leh, for example, in Ladakh. Uh, I would say that mm, things in Spiti are different. I mean, what we are experiencing right now with the tourism boom in Spiti, it's too recent a phenomenon. While it may be sustained over the years to come, maybe after this pandemic ends, that will definitely continue to push towards a gradual commercialization of certain aspects of Spitian life, which till now have been just forms of hospitality, etc. Those changes happen. Those changes happen everywhere.
Mm.
Um and as for the friction between Tibetan Buddhist culture of the local people and between tourists and migrant labor, the perception is very much there among a lot of uh, people in Spiti that such kind of losses are happening, that there is a need to do more in order to record folk songs, folk traditions, to have these events where they practice certain forms of folk arts, folk sports, etc., etc. But there is also the recognition that sometimes these people who come from outside to work in Spiti as migrant workers, as laborers, as craftspersons, they, even though they may not be Buddhists, they may be Hindus or Muslims or Christians, they often become almost like members of households in Spiti. Yeah? And they often also pick up the local language, the local dialect, and sometimes so well that some local people themselves have told me that once they heard somebody coming from behind talking to them in the local dialect, asking for directions, they felt it was a local villager coming from the behind, but they saw a Bihari coming. Yeah. So, and these examples are cited as positive examples by locals. Yeah. So there are some cases in which some people feel that there are frictions, but there are a lot many other cases where people feel that migrant workers, particularly domestic workers, are more or less an inevitable part of the changing political economy of Spiti, and they are here to stay. I mean, their need is there, the demand is very high, because most Spiti households you will find one man working in the fields, one man will have some kind of government job, somebody will be working in some form of tourism thing, the children will be going to a government school or to school outside Spiti. So to tend to the animals still in the household, or to tend to the fields in the, or to supervise other migrant workers working in the fields, they often do not have enough manpower at house. So these migrant workers are fulfilling that gap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions? We have a lot of questions in the chat section, and I would really appreciate if you could. I know that Parth has a question. Parth, would you ask your question if you're around?
Yeah, hi Sonali. Thank
Hi.
you. Um, uh, Thank you for the wonderful talk, Abhimanyu.
Thank you.
My question was about negative impacts. Besides the tourism issues, what other negative impacts have occurred that is not related to tourism? Is there increasing crime, for example, or are there people against tourism or development in this sector?
Okay. So thanks for the question, sir. Tourism isn't necessarily seen as a negative thing by itself, but some of its effects are seen as negative. I mean, it is seen as a thing that needs to be grappled with, because it is like a sector that gives a lot of economic options and money that comes rather easily, rather than through back breaking work through labor or through agricultural field work, etc. But negative impacts, I would say there is some small incidence of drugs, but that's not much. I mean, compared to nearby regions such as Kullu or other parts of Himachal Pradesh, the drug incidence is very low. And in fact, Lahaul Spiti, I read in 2019, it was designated as a zero crime district, as the district with the lowest crime in the entire Himachal Pradesh state, because there is just so little that happens. I mean, most of it is in the form of minor household disputes, etc., etc. But it is also there something that I learned through my field work, that certain deaths that are reported as natural in Spiti at times have not been so, they have been suicides. Yeah, but it's like a taboo subject and it's not discussed very openly in the valley. Um, so definitely, I think some of the negative impacts are not very visible, but they are felt. I mean, there is also the fact that there is a lot of intergenerational gap in understanding about the world between people who are now in the 40s and 50s and people who are now in their 20s and 30s. In a place like Spiti, where so much has changed so fast, and there is often a sense that the elder generation does not quite understand what the younger generation is going through, which happens in other places also, but in a place with so much extreme as Spiti, which has seen so much change happening so fast in the last 15, 20 years. I mean, this is more pronounced in some places. So that is there. Then, other than that, sir, there is a problem of garbage disposal, which is a very major problem which has happened with the coming in of tourism. But that's also not something very unique to Spiti. Other than that, in terms of crime, I can't really say anything, sir. As I just said, it's considered like a zero crime district. Yeah, that's all I think I would say.
And also just one question about the tourism.
Yeah.
What percentage of people are not involved in tourism or not benefiting from it?
Tourism, sir. So by and large, like Spiti has say 71 villages. Yeah. So tourism in Spiti, in the sense that villages which have homestays or hotels or hostels, I don't think there are more than 10 or 15 of them that have these places. So in terms of the numbers of people who are engaged in tourism, it's actually not that many. It's only in a few hundreds if you count that in numbers. Uh, but a lot of people get employed as an effect of the tourists coming, like as taxi drivers, like as guides, or opening up more shops because there are more demands due to more people coming in, and so on and so forth. So that's it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
The next question is from Kisang. Kisang, if you could ask your question, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Abhimanyu. Wonderful presentation. And actually, I'm working with Aniket Alam, and I can see he's also there on the talk. And Aman is also there. And we are jointly doing a project in Spiti as well. I was very intrigued by your presentation, especially when you were talking about what is a Spitian identity. And when just now somebody asked you the question about, say, the increase in crime rate, with different kind of, say, the roads coming in and different kind of ideas and the idea of flows that you discussed. And because I am from Lahore, and somewhere this idea of Lahore and Spiti being reported as the area with zero crime rate, I feel that it is also deeply linked with the idea of sort of constructing that tribal Spitian or Lahuli identity that you are studying. And there's a very I haven't actually read that work, but I have read few articles by Himika Bhattacharya, and she has written this book called Narrating Love and Violence: Women Contesting Tribe, State and Caste in Lahore. Her field site was Lahore, but somewhere she has very, powerfully kind of documented how silence works around the idea of violence in tribal societies, and how somehow, say, this also becomes very functional to tribal patriarchy, for example, and so how, say, the state's patriarchal nature meets with the tribal patriarchy, and how that becomes very important in putting forward the idea that in tribal societies there are, say, no inequalities, or in tribal societies there is no gender-based violence. So why her work is very important is because, say, one of her ethnographic sites was the police station in Kelong, for example, and she kind of went through the files of different kinds of gendered violence that had come, that was reported in Lahore over the years, and somehow how that narrative also shifts say if it is a murder and how it kind of becomes a suicide, and how that is kind of remembered by the community. So also exploring the idea of counter memory when it comes to gendered violence. So I felt that I wanted to intervene with that respect, because somehow now, the idea of zero crime rate, I think it's also kind of has become like a convenient narrative for the community, both in Lahore and Spiti, to assert that, okay, it's an area with relatively, it's different from mainstream, and these kind of, say, crimes or violence doesn't happen. So I felt I had to intervene in that. But otherwise, we see that there are a lot of, there's a lot of similarities in the project we are trying to do together with Aniket Alam. And especially I'm very intrigued by all what you said on the idea of the Spitian identity. And I think there is, of course, as you say, a lot of anxiety around that. So wonderful. Thanks a lot.
Can I respond to that for a moment? Firstly, thanks, ma'am, for all your very insightful points. And I actually agree with you on the fact that police records, of course, always say one thing, but when you end up spending more time in a community, you tend to see things which are invisible to a person who just visits for a short period of time, or to people who want to see things only in a particular way. Particularly if you are trained as an anthropologist, then you can see through these things. And I have seen some of that in Spiti as well. I mean, in some of the households that I worked with, I have seen how the domestic division of labor has become very fraught due to the coming in of tourism, because now the woman of the household has additional tasks besides also taking care of the cleaning up of the household, cooking, etc., to take care of the needs of the tourism business, if it be a hotel or a homestay or whatever it is. And sometimes that can also lead to uh, marital conflicts in the valley, because men in Spiti, generally, I mean, that's like a thing you see across the mountain areas, that men generally do not work as hard as women do in these parts. So, but they nonetheless, they try to occupy the dominant position in the household. So, more burden gets added onto the woman, even if the income of the household on the whole goes up with the coming in of tourism. So those kind of things are there, and I haven't really looked at the gender aspect of things in too close a detail. I mean, because my emphasis was on a lot of other things, on the landscape, on the kind of activities happening and all. But nonetheless, I think it's a very important point that you made, and I think it deserves in-depth inquiry as you are doing. So I would say congratulations on that, man. And thank you for the point. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a few more questions. Dr. Vibha Joshi, if you could ask your questions. I know you have a couple of them in the chat, so
Oh God, I have kind of forgotten what all I was writing. But okay, I have several comments, whatever I remember. Okay, because you've also studied development studies in Cambridge and other things, so you are kind of quite well-rounded in that way. I was just wondering. I think you must be aware of Swargjyoti's article on roads. She works in Arunachal and she talks about the Tibet manual things. And also, there's very interesting, I mean, her book that has come out recently, it is on this whole question of affirmative reservation and how the Tibetans who were already in Arunachal, how they, I mean, their status as such, and how some Tibetans are crossing over from Tibet to get the affirmative to become part of that whole sort of setup of affirmative action. So I think you might like to read her work, though it is from the other side, but it will give you ideas. And I mean, I had other kind of small comments and queries since you have spent time there. See, I do not know whether it's geographically correct area where this Hing project is being planned. You know, the Asphoetida. Now they have, yeah, because we in India always imported it. Okay. Though there are a lot of people who go around selling hing from Himachal and things, but most of it comes from outside, from Afghanistan and other places. And now the present government is deciding to start Asphoetida cultivation in Lahul Spiti. So I do not know whether it comes under your area or not. And what would, I mean, this is something that you might want to find out, since you said that there was a small cash crop that is being grown. I could not get the name of the cash crop.
Hara matar, ma'am, green pea.
Pardon?
Hara matar, green pea.
Oh, green pea. Okay, all right. Now this is hing that is coming now. And yeah. But I do not know whether it's in the same area where you work. You know, that's the thing. I mean, since I'm not geographically familiar with.
It's very unlikely, ma'am. It's very, very unlikely because
it's in Lahul Spiti Valley. So I don't know.
The thing is, ma'am, that Lahore is geographically very different from Spiti.
Very different, yeah.
Spiti is a cold desert. Lahore is very green, so I think it would be.
Yeah, I think it's in Lahore probably. But this hing grows in very sort of cold desert kind of condition, so that's why. And the other thing was, oh God, now let me actually scroll up because I'm lost a little bit. Yeah, I was also wanted to know, I think I missed the first 10 minutes of your presentation, so I could not get the hierarchy, you know, what kind of hierarchy is there. And secondly, I was thinking about, you know, what happened in Tibet. China built the road and also the railhead. It was in like 2004 or something when the train reached, you know, the highest train. But with that came a lot of Han Chinese inside. And now all the sort of shops and things, the business has been taken over by Han Chinese. They have bought, you know, a lot of land and things. So it's kind of a state policy where you open the area, but with that also open the control that you have people from other part coming in whichever way. So I do not know whether the shops are actually owned by the people from Spiti, or they're the outsiders opening shops, or it's like in Nagaland where they do these tie-ups because they cannot buy land and things, but all the business is done by outsiders and they give a monthly payment to the Naga person in whose name the business is. Okay. This happens in Arunachal also. And the other thing I was wondering when you were talking about medical facilities and about childbirth and how, you know, people have to go outside. So what was there before the roads? Were there traditional midwives, or are there trained midwives also there to help in normal childbirth? I can understand when there is an emergency case which requires cesarean and all that, you would need hospitals. But otherwise, there might be some system. I mean, how are they birthing children before the roads came in? The Chinese incursion, this, that. I mean, there's a whole politics of roads and border roads. Maintaining the road itself is, you know, brings out the whole defense and everything, you know, that the state needs to extend control. And till where they extend control and what is under control and what's happening in the international politics, which is making them. So, I mean, I'll stop here because I'm sure other people have interesting questions to ask.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. That was very good. Actually, I hardly know anything about that region. So it's always good to hear these, you know, talks. All right.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think all your points are very well taken, ma'am. This thing about Dr. Swargjyoti Gohen, I recently read some of her work and it's very relevant to what I do. So thanks again for reiterating that.
Yeah, she's at Ashoka University, so she's
I know.
contacted easily. Yeah.
Sure. And regarding Hing, I really don't know, ma'am. Not even once in my time in Spiti did I come across it, which is very strange.
No, this is
So
absolutely new. Okay, this is like a month or so ago, 4 weeks, 5 weeks ago. Indian government is going all up and down, and all the agricultural scientists are getting very excited about it.
then I wouldn't know, ma'am. And
No, so
then
it
it
must be
also
in
in a way
Lahore, as you
falls.
said.
It's in Lahore then.
Yeah, it must be in Lahore. Yeah,
Can't be in Spiti. Spiti is too
yeah.
extreme. Spiti
Mm,
is much more extreme than Lahore in
Lahore.
geography.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you can compare Lahore still with some parts of Upper Kinnaur or Lower
Mm-hmm.
Arunachal or Gangtok and all these places, but Spiti is properly speaking a cold desert.
Yeah, it is.
It
Yeah, the cold desert.
it really limits what you can grow there. It's not
Mm-hmm.
very common that you would find an agricultural experiment and people don't know about it. If it was something big in Spiti, everyone would know about it. It's very, very uncommon because
But this
there
is
is.
very recent, so I do not know when you were there last.
I was there, ma'am, in on January 21. I left Spiti
Yeah,
this
I
year.
think this is very, very recent.
Very recent,
Yeah,
yeah, ma'am.
yeah, very recent. Yeah.
Other than that, ma'am, hierarchy, Tibet Railway, Han Chinese, who owns the shops in Aruna? So, who owns the shops, ma'am? In Spiti, as you were saying about Arunachal, very similar. The land, the entire population of Spiti is scheduled tribe by designation, by state designation, and they can only sell land to other tribals from Himachal Pradesh, like people from Lahore, people from Kinnaur, people from what's that area called? Some parts of Chamba, and that's it. And they cannot sell it to any other Himachali either. And as you would know, no outsider can buy land in Himachal, apart from some very, very limited spaces where that is allowed. I mean, there are some very restricted rules that allow for that, but there's a long criteria. But in Spiti, not even that is allowed. Only
Okay.
tribals can buy land. As for the properties, these shops, the shops are all owned by locals. The property, the building in which the business is being transacted, it is owned by the locals, but they are leased out to these traders from outside. That is what happens. As you were saying, also happens in Arunachal, uh, and Chinese. And that thing about Han Chinese and Lhasa and Tibet and people opening up these hitherto remote areas to people from the outside as means of integrating them into the larger fold, so to say, of the national life, etc. I mean, it's all there in the gazetteers if you read them from the 1970s, 80s in Spiti. And that was there. I mean, that they wanted to make Spiti as a visible part of the national project and also wanted to make Spiti people feel a greater degree of loyalty and warmth towards the Indian state. Yeah. And what was there in Spiti before the roads in childbirth? There were midwives, ma'am, and there were the local amchis also who sometimes helped in the process. The local practitioners of the Sova Rigpa medicine, the traditional Tibetan Buddhism form of medicine. They were there, man. There
Okay.
were a few amchis and midwives in every village, and they held quite some esteem in the past, and now not that much anymore. There is actually an entire PhD thesis on this particular thing of what kind
Okay.
of medicinal systems existed in
Uh-huh.
uh,
Okay.
till very recently and how the coming in of modern medicine has changed things. It's by a guy from my university called Florian Besch, Besch. I think it is from
Okay.
2006 or something, and
Oh,
it
okay.
to
Okay.
do with
Mm-hmm.
Tibetan medicinal systems in or
Okay.
medicinal
Yeah.
systems in Spiti.
Okay.
And roads, as for border roads, etc. Yeah, I mean, Spiti roads are border roads, and
You said that they're maintained by border roads. One of the roads is maintained.
No,
National
not
Highway. National Highway is maintained by border roads.
national highway. But the thing is that in the past it was not. It was, interestingly, it's only 10 years ago that it came under the BRO. Before that, it was maintained by the HPPWD, the Himachal Pradesh
Okay.
Public Works Department. So there is a very definite uh, strategic interest involved in the transference of this
Mhm.
road section, and I have all the official correspondence on that through RTI.
Okay.
That
Oh,
happened.
all
It
right.
actually,
Oh,
yeah, I filed a huge number of RTIs when I was in Spiti.
oh my goodness. Do that in Nagaland. Since the Gref and all have stopped doing the roads in Nagaland, there are no roads in Nagaland anymore. One quick question about the musician. Is there any apprenticeship available to anyone else outside the family, or the tradition has to run in the family only? And are there any efforts by local community to document their, cultural heritage as such?
Definitely, ma'am. There are actually quite several initiatives that I'm aware of within Spiti, run by Spiti locals, not even by any prodding by outsiders, but on their own initiative, who have tried to document the folk songs, the different kinds of folk songs and stuff, and these things. And as for apprenticeship, I am not aware of anyone who has done that. Also, because the job of the Beda musician is seen in customary terms as a lowly position in the society.
Mhm.
It's a bit like how you see the temple drummers, etc. in
Okay. Mhm. Yeah, because I missed your bit on hierarchies. That's why, I sort of do not know where the position is of different groups. Okay. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks. And good luck for your PhD.
Thank you.
So let's take the last question. We have Aman Panta. Aman, if you could ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Am I audible?
Hanji, Hanji.
Yeah, thank you, Abhimanyu, for this enlightening lecture. So again, we are also working in Spiti, and my question is to you. Basically, I want to know more about, when we are talking about, you talk very less about that when British came here. It's 1846, I think, when the first time British took over the Spiti and the administration of the Spiti, and after that, there are so many reforms, like I call it reforms, though it is happening all over the India, like where British are going, they are reforming the land settlements and the local judicial system, and etc, etc. But the very first reason of the joining Spiti into the India from the Ladakh is to we have to clear the two trade routes, two major. One is from the, which is very, but both of these trade routes are not in the Spiti. One is from, which is goes to the Lahore, to the Changthang Valley, to the Western Tibet, and other is from the Kinnaur. So, but whenever, I think you must have been read about these all archival resource, where they have clearly mentioned we need Spiti, because Spiti is very the border where we have to we need this area, because it's very close to Western Tibet, and we know. So I mean that when this is very important for the Britishers, why they have not done so much? You are talking about they have not opened road to Spiti, they have not done anything, like still their political affairs is local political affairs, especially not outer political affairs are governed by the nonos of the Spitis, remain continue till 1947, I think. So if you talk about more about it, if you have read something about it, so it's very helpful for me. Apart from it, I want to add two, three short points to you, which is like when you're talking about the land reform in Spiti, like now younger sons also getting land from the government, and and the government is creating. So there is still in whenever we have done the interviews in Spiti, there we found almost 3 or 4, 5 villages where the conflict is still going on, that the traditional irrigation system is controlled by the Khangchen families, but they are not ready to share water with the, and here the monastery sometime intervene. Like Tabo, it's a monastery who intervened, and
Yeah, I
in
know the
Pin
story.
Valley
Yeah, yeah,
again.
yeah.
Yeah. So apart from it, last point I
Yeah.
want to add that you are talking about the Nasha, but what? So it's a small point I want to add that the Rangrik, if you enter into the Rangrik village, you will find that it's a alcohol-free village and no one can drink alcohol here, something like that. And again, the second point is in Tabo. If you there is a women organization, the local self-help women group have closed the liquor shop in Tabo. If you heard about that, this shop is run by the very one of the biggest entrepreneur of the Spiti, who has a shop in Gaza, etc. So there are so many incidents that where the local also asserted, and the things are not very clear. Like it's not like in a black and white manner.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what I would say to that, sir, would be that thanks for your detailed comment. I mean, definitely all these things you mentioned, I encountered them over my research. As for the British, there is a huge amount of data. I mean, you can find it in any library here. I think the most summarized form you would find it in is the works of Dr. Christian Yehuda. You can look him up, Jahoda. Look him up on Google Scholar. His papers are there on Spiti, the reformation of political economy of Spiti under British rule. So you will find that there. As for the Spiti Ladakh thing, Spiti became a part of British India through this Treaty of Amritsar or something. I mean, all of that is there in the gazetteers. You can just look it up. The reasons I didn't go too much into detail was that I was covering a very large amount of ground. I mean, of course, in everything that I talked about today, there is a lot more nuance that can be added. So that's there. And as for the land reforms, yes, it remains a very, very contested domain, as you pointed out. And I agree. Yeah, that will come at some point in my thesis as well. Yes. Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aman. And so just wanted to kind of, just thank you so much, Abhimanyu, for shedding light on, roads. I think people really kind of do not touch upon it, that what an impact it can have and how it changes society and life as we see it. And of course, I'll always, I know you're an anthropologist, but I would always say that the government always needs to consult archaeologists and anthropologists, because I think we have this knack of looking at long-term patterns and the effect it can have. And if we look at, the Kulu Valley and Manali and how public policy has kind of impacted how even Kulu Valley has become, when we look at homestays, for example, and the urban sprawl that places like Manali and Kulu have become. And I remember, when I was young, I used to see these wooden facades of beautiful streets and the bazaars here, and how all that has changed, because I feel the government really didn't realize that every act that they take can have such an impact, even on these roads that we go, like Lakkar Bazaar and all, sorry, Akhara Bazaar. Like, so if they could have something like have homestays, for example, and have the facade of the old and change, because who are we to decide what can you choose or what can you not choose? We who come from cities sometimes think that, oh, only we have the right to change, others don't. They do have a right to change, as do people in Spiti. They have a right to change, they have a right to adapt, but something that also keeps their identity intact with all these changes that come with road connectivities and with changing government policies and all of that. And I'm sure that with your research, whoever reads it, in the higher ups in the government can gain some insight as to what this does to the people and how important all this research is, because identity and rootedness they are so important in our lives, and how all this can change in just one, should I say, magical wand or stroke or whatever it is. And we wish you all the best, Abhimanyu. And we have this tradition of all the speakers saying leaving us with words of wisdom. So, what are yours?
Thank you so much for kind of giving me so much, giving your time and attention for today. And words of wisdom, I don't know, ma'am. I'm a student myself. What words of wisdom will I share? So I think I've already shared enough, and wish you all, whichever part of the world you are, I wish you happy Christmas and a happy New Year. And I hope that you pass safely through these troubled times. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abhimanyu, and all the best for your PhD. And
Thank you.
we hope you come back with more insights as you progress in your research. And we would love to hear. And whoever wants to connect with you, if you could allow me to pass on your email address to them.
Sure.
If they have suggestions or they have questions, they can always connect with you. And thank you so much. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, please join us again next weekend at 7:30 with another speaker. And I've also invited Abhimanyu's brother, Siddharth Pandey, in the future to give a talk. So we're really looking forward to that. And Abhimanyu, keep safe and take care. And we hope to see you soon. Yeah.
Thank you. Julie, okay. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye, Abhimanyu.
Bye, Julie. Julie.